Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, Tesla and their latest set of recalls are proof that you should be careful with driverless automation. Tony Joe's here to weigh in. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, we're not taking calls today, and if you got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. And at the site, you can send a question into the Ask Bob section, and I will get it taken care of. If you would like a question to get on our with Tony Joe and I, as we do every Friday, you can send one to me describing your problem with your car. Make sure, though, that you are very descriptive and leave out and include, a lot of details with that. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Tony Joe, how are you doing today?
Well, I am doing fine. I often wonder why you say, well, Tony Joe's going to weigh in. It's almost like you're making me out to be like 400 pounds, Bob.
Weigh in means to give us your thoughts and opinions.
Okay, then. I get it.
It's a dangerous task.
So I understand now what you mean.
Okay, yes. So that's, and if we can keep from your jokes, we're doing even better. But this thing, we talk about this from time to time as stories like this come up. And it just amazes me, Tony Joe. This story is about Tesla being, they're voluntarily recalling 362,000 vehicles equipped with the company's experimental driver assistance software. Now, let's just take a break here. I want to break this article down and do this so that so listeners can really look at this story and go, okay, maybe I see what Tony, Joe, and Bob are saying. Hey, we're going to put this software on. This is the prototype of where we want it, the beta version of where we want to be. And we're doing this so all the mistakes can be made. We have no idea the hundreds of thousands of mistakes, combinations of things that could happen that could make a mistake.
So we could tweak it a little.
But we need to get this down to, probably about at least 97% reliable. An experimental. I just wonder if people that have signed up to have this put into their car, if they really have a good understanding of what's there, because this article just describes some things that blow my mind. What do you think about that?
Going back to a couple of years ago, we were talking about the software issues that come from autonomous vehicles that, remember, Bob, we were talking about it, like how can one, or even a battery or a council or a group of human beings that are writing software for driverless cars, how can they possibly come up with every scenario possible to avoid a collision? I just don't think it's. Now we have AI, and that's even scarier that it would write software for this. But, being an experimental driving software, it's just, I ask myself, would I get in it and do it? I don't know, maybe, but would I put my grandchildren in there and send them to a certain, destination and not worry about it? No, I would not.
So this beta system, this is according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, may cause crashes by allowing the affected vehicles to, end quote, act unsafe around intersections. That's a big one. Such as traveling straight through an intersection while in a turn-only lane, entering a stop sign controlled intersection without coming to a complete stop, or just proceeding into an intersection during a steady yellow traffic signal with due caution. And you look at all these things. Now, here's what troubles me. We've talked about this. First of all, they name these beta versions or these software versions as if they are fully automated vehicles. I can't remember what Tesla calls something else in those cars, some type of automation that sounds like pilot, co-pilot or something like that. That makes it seem like, well, I can just sit here and read a book. And so the thing that's troubling is that you have someone driving the car, and are they going to sit there and just watch it drive? I mean, are you going to take a nap? Are they going to reach over, take their eye off the road? Because if I'm approaching a stop sign that this car is not going to stop, and then I slam the brakes, someone hits me from behind, I just can't even imagine putting myself into that kind of a situation.
Well, when a lot of people don't understand, and here's my problem with it. Let me just point this out. When you're on autopilot or you're driving, the Tesla will drive itself to a certain point. It will autonomously take over. However, it is not to be trusted, so to speak. So you have to kind of sit there and you have to observe in case something goes wrong. And when you do this after a couple of hours of driving on the highway and you're approaching a dangerous situation like an accident or, a backup, a bottleneck, anything, are you going to be on the Ready 5 after sitting there for 2 hours, bored out of your mind, or maybe not bored, but not ready to jump in there and take over in a hazardous situation? You got seconds to react. Are you going to be ready for that after sitting there for 2 or 3 hours? Or even worse, Bob, there's a lot of pictures. People catch others on camera going down the highway and totally taking a nap, just sound asleep. And just, zoom, they pass. The Tesla, most of them are Teslas, I should say, and they'll pass on the passing lane, and the people will look over and go, that lady's asleep, and they take a picture on their phone.
Well, it's funny. I was sitting here thinking about this as I'm driving along. Sometimes the only thing that keeps me awake is the fact that I have to drive. Mm-hmm. I'd be sleeping if not.
So in this article, does it say, like, this is an experimental program that they're going to introduce, and people actually apply this to their vehicle, and then they go out, and then Tesla, I assume, is going to see what happens?
So what ends up happening, according to this article, is that you too can have this in your car for the small one-time price of...
Okay, now, in the fine print, does it say anywhere, do we get hazard pay for this?
Yeah, right.
I'll do it.
No, but... the one-time price, you're going to think I'm making this up, $15,000 to have this
for a chance to take on an experimental driverless program,
or $199 a month. I have no idea if that's for the life of the car or not. But not even to say the risk for the person that's sitting behind the wheel. What about all the cars around?
This is my biggest point, is knowing that this experimental driverless program is out there is one thing. If you want to do it, that's up to you. But what about the rest of us? How do we feel about sharing the road with you? I mean, there's two sides to this. And, of course, what we know at this point, the information we have right now, it doesn't look good. I wouldn't want to share the road with that.
So now this is what I find really interesting. The last part of the article, the safety recall report notes, the driver is responsible for operation of the vehicle whenever the feature is engaged and must constantly supervise the feature and intervene to maintain the safe operation of the vehicle. I mean, that's at the very, very end of the now Musk. He's a little ticked off because he doesn't want the word recall anywhere near his car, because he goes, And this is really pretty cool if you think about it. He can sit there behind a computer and send out a fix or send out an installation of a new version or whatever update just by pushing a button. And it all goes out to all those cars, and then they download it. And it's done. I think that's pretty cool.
That is debatable. You think it's cool. I think it a further step beyond that, and I'm often wondering if they can do that with the push of a button and invade your privacy.
Right. Yeah,
what else can they do if you take it to nefarious reasons? You know, what else could they do if they wanted to? Everybody turn left. Boom, push a button. I mean, think about the damaging things they can do. I don't like it. Don't like it a bit. Don't want it. But then everybody tells me, oh, you're old. Well, I don't think it's a good idea. However, it's the coming thing.
You just have to hack into just have to. I'm sure it takes unbelievable skill to get into a Tesla computer system. But, I mean, there's people trying to hack everything all the time. So
the Russians could do it.
Yeah. It's just interesting how, because the one thing anytime we've talked about this that just really sticks with me is that in order for this to be a viable part of reality and transportation, they have to go through and see all these wrecks happen.
Growing pains.
Growing pain, and growing pains are not good when you're talking about this type of thing. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. We're up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back.
The Word for Today is excited to announce the new official online home for the ministry of Pastor Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, PastorChuck.org. At PastorChuck.org, you'll have instant access to thousands of hours of verse-by-verse teaching by Pastor Chuck Smith from Genesis through Revelation, and full access to special messages on subjects such as prophecy and much, much more. Also at PastorChuck.org, a full library of great teachings by Kay Smith, and a section where you can read some of Pastor Chuck's books online, all free of charge. So visit the new official online home of the Word for Today and the ministry of Pastor Chuck and Kay Smith, PastorChuck.org.
In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, the Apostle Paul reminds us that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And we see this destructive desire at work in the betrayal of Jesus by one of his own. But Monday on The Verdict, Pastor John Monroe contrasts this misplaced love with the matchless love of Christ. Listen Monday to The Verdict.
The Verdict, weekday mornings at 10:30, here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Dr. Charles Stanley.
Do we have the courage to trust Him and obey Him no matter what's going on? If you want life at its best, you can just wrap it up in that. You want life at its best, trust Him and obey Him and leave all the consequences to Him, because He's going to take care of all the consequences of our obedience.
In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, helping you grow in Christ every day.
In Touch, weekdays at 12:30, here on KDKR.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. We're not taking calls today, and if you got a question for me, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and I'll get you taken care of. Last week, we started talking about if you had your choice of a lot of miles on a car or the age of a car. Said another way, a lot of miles on a younger vehicle versus a older vehicle and a very few miles. Which one would you take? And we started there. We didn't get very far. We'll go back again over that, Tony Joe, and give us some insight into which is really the better combination.
In my opinion, the newer car with a lot of miles on it. And here's why this is what formulates my opinion. You may not understand, but it's not something the average person would realize. You have to be an old automotive mechanic for years to watch these kind of things transpire. And that is that cars like to be used. Cars like to get up and go every morning. They want to do something. They They are happier when they are run. And the reason for this, I believe, boils down to expansion and contraction of all the materials, especially the ones in the engine. We have aluminum heads, cast iron blocks. We have aluminum blocks, aluminum heads. We have aluminum blocks or let me just say there's different types of metals used in the engine, and it requires a certain amount of expansion and contraction for everything to seal and fit. And it takes lots of abuse when it starts in the morning cold and warms up to 220 degrees and then cools back down at night. When vehicles are run every day on a consistent basis and used for the purpose they're intended for, they seem to run better and have less breakdowns. Provided you do the oil changes and tune-ups and things that are required due to wear and tear. But this is what I believe is that the car with the mileage is not as important anymore as it used to be. And the main reason for that is better technology, of course. But one of the biggest things that people overlook is the advent of how sophisticated and dependable and more refined the oil is that you put in a car now. It is really come a long way, and the lubrication properties are so much better. The engine just runs good for a longer period of time than ever before. And so I would personally pick the newer car with a lot of miles on it.
So obviously, if you're going to go out and buy a pre-owned car, and it's funny to me, we've talked about this in the past, and I've always thought about that's something I would avoid is a high mileage car. And it couldn't be more wrong, because that can be a great value, a great buy, because they still sell those with the fact that, hey, you put 100,000 miles on this car, you're going to get a discount. But tell me this, obviously, it's going to be important that you see the service records. I mean, that's the best. That's the ideal. A car with complete set of books and receipts and all that type of thing. But even if you've got that, is there anything else that you would look for that you would say, that's a red flag? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, of course, before you buy a car, here's the thing: you can buy from a dealership a certified vehicle, which is pretty thoroughly tested and investigated and can be trusted pretty much for the most part. I mean, there's going to be a few that fall between the cracks. But if you're buying a vehicle and you don't have it checked out first, then you're asking for trouble. Because, for instance, let me just give you one example that I've run across several times in my short career, and that is a lot of plugs in, like a tune-up problem now, spark plugs. They're supposed to be changed generally, not every car, but generally you're supposed to replace the plugs around 100,000 miles, okay? Let's just use that as a general rule of thumb. That is not specific to every vehicle. But people with this 100,000 mile thing in their head, they kind of tend to get rid of the car, number one, just below 100,000 miles. And the reason for that is the resale value is much better. Their trade-in value, everything is worth more if it's got a little bit less than 100,000 miles. Okay? So here's what happens. 91,000 miles, the guy trades in the car. He gets a new car. The person that buys that car is assuming that it's a good car, but they don't realize that at 91,000, the man turned it in, or the woman turned it in, traded it in. It sat on the lot. Now it gets resold. About a year later, their car is misfiring. The check engine light's on. They want to know what's going on. Well, it turns out the spark plugs never got changed because the guy turned it in at 91,000. They bought it, drove it. Now it's got 108,000 on it, and that got skipped over. The maintenance wasn't done, and that's a very common thing I see. And when that happens, it's frustrating, but it's a normal wear and tear thing, and you just have to have a tune-up.
So let's talk a little bit about a car with low mileage and go back again to the service records and that kind of thing. Is it more or less important with a car with low miles to have those service records? It would seem to me that it would be maybe even more important to have the service records because you don't really have anything to go by.
Well, that's exactly right. You need the service records on any car, but the ones with lower mileage are very important because a lot of cars with low miles have sat a lot. And this is another thing that we have to enter ourselves to new territory lately, and that is with the advent of COVID that came on. A lot of people worked from home. Their cars sat a lot more than they ever did before. When a car sits around and doesn't get started and used every day, it develops its own problems. It absorbs moisture into all the fluids. It contaminates different parts of the engine and transmission simply from the moisture it accumulated because it never got run. And part of running a car is developing heat. That heat evaporates the water, and then the water doesn't have a chance to do any damage to anything because you're doing it on a daily basis. But when it sits a lot, you're going to get all kinds of issues that develop, and even though you're doing the maintenance as required, it has sidebar issues that need to be addressed just from the fact that it's sitting around so long.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. If you've got a question for me, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and I'll get you taken care of. Let's talk a little bit about miles or age when it comes to an oil change. So we'll start with the car that maybe sees 3,000 miles a year, not 2,000 or 3,000 miles a year. Their onboard computer pops up and says, you need to get, because they're counting days, I guess, you need to get this done, this done, and this done. Well, you're way away from the mileage target to get those maintenance done. So what do you listen to, the days or the miles?
Okay. I'd like to address that real quick because you brought up an excellent point that I'd like to tell people about just because it's good information. That onboard computer popping up, as you said, says time for an oil change. We do not believe in going by that onboard computer oil change reset procedure. And the reason for that is because it does not actually address the climate situations locally in our area. It is designed to find a happy medium for any place that this car could be sold on the globe, which means any place in Europe, any place in Asia, any place around, South America. Climates are different. So, for example, Bob, here in Dallas, Fort Worth, in the summertime, when you're sitting on Preston Road at 108 degrees and got your air conditioning on and, listening to our station, 91.3, you probably are really stressing that engine to the point where it isn't going to go. Some of these mileage indicators are set at 7,500 miles. You don't want to go that long before you have your oil changed. You should go back to getting the oil changed, having a sticker put in the window, and going by that mileage, because that onboard computer can be spaced out so far that you could have premature engine damage, and it will, at that time, be off warranty, and that'll be your baby at that point. So to answer your question, I guess I got off topic a little bit, but do you need to change the oil more or less if the car sits around a lot? If you only had 3,000 miles on the car and it's been a year, you need to change the oil, of course. But if your car sits for 2 years and you've only got 3,000 miles on it, you still need to change the oil because of the absorption of moisture and contaminating that oil from sitting around. So it works both ways. You need to change the oil more often on a car that sits around a lot due to contamination in the oil, not due to breakdown of the oil over a certain amount of abuse of miles.
And I guess the same thing would the same thing apply to the 15,000 mile maintenance
interval,
or the 30,000, or would that same thing apply to that?
It would not really affect that in so much as, unless the car was really, really extremely low miles and 5 or 6 or 10 years old. I mean,
Right.
there are occasions that, you'd have to address that as a personal matter and not go by the routine maintenance schedule. But for the most part, just go by the routine maintenance schedule and you'll be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Tony Joe always comes by the studio on Fridays and answers your Car Corner questions. We'll be back again next Friday, so if you've got a question, make sure that you call in and ask it. Once again, if you had a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.